Welcome to the AT Construction Podcast, and we have Dom Rubino with us. Welcome, Dom.
Hey, how are you, Brett?
Good. I'm actually really excited about this episode, Dom. And just a quick background, Dom is a business coach, author, entrepreneur. I know you've sold some amazing companies. We'll get into you've spoken. You have a TED Talk out there that we can all look up. So it's pretty impressive. Before we go sideways, but just a quick background. Dom and I connected. I was on your podcast, on your show. And
that's right.
Just was blown away just by just your knowledge base and what you offer to the community, your entrepreneurship. And I know you're an entrepreneur at heart, which is essentially our entire audience. And there were some things you said that I'm okay, I got to bring Dom on so he can elaborate. And, the first one was the captain or lighthouse. So maybe we'll start there.
Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah, just captain or lighthouse. It's like, okay, well, this can go many ways.
Yeah. Well, it's, what it's about is the leadership style that you have, right? There's an old joke, and you may or may not have heard it, but there's this boat that's bearing down on this other smaller boat. It's a huge naval destroyer, and it's sending those light signals off to this other boat in the distance. It says, look, you got to change your course, we're a naval destroyer. And the other light coming back is saying, no, I think you need to change your course. And the captain of the naval destroyer is like, are you kidding me? And then eventually they realize, hey, we're talking to a lighthouse.
I've heard that story. It's a good one.
Right. And so if you're a business leader, I want you to think about yourself as either the captain of that naval destroyer or the lighthouse. You could choose either one. The lighthouse, that light scans, right? We've all seen a lighthouse. It's one of the list of places where we're going to go this spring break, or, we're going to go somewhere stormy. We're going to go somewhere sunny, right? But if you go somewhere stormy, you see these lighthouses. But the lighthouse spins and it illuminates the dangers of the water, these islands. Well, those islands are time, team, money, what's our growth strategy, right? It illuminates those for you so that the captain can navigate. Now, when you're the captain of your business, as you and I are we looking for the lighthouse as an asset? Or are we just trying to be the gutsy, grit your teeth, I'm the captain, I'm going to force my way through anything, even if we're going to run into one of those islands? And so you have to choose what kind of leader you're going to be. You could be the captain, or you could be the lighthouse, but either way, you've got to choose.
So that's interesting. I mean, when you give the analogy, captain, lighthouse, and maybe we'll start with the lighthouse, if this is kind of our beacon, right, that we want to be the leader, such as a lighthouse, and we're, we're stationary, right? We have good leadership. We're looking at the different aspects, like you said, time and team and, the assets that we have as our company, business development and the customer experience and all these things that go into that marketing. I mean, there's so many elements, right, to run a business. What does that mean as that light's rotating? Are you focusing on certain elements? We all have heard, hey, Dom, if you're a business owner, you need to spend X hours, X time on your business, right? But what does that mean? How does that break down? Is there something that's more important than something else?
Yeah. So things change, right? Some things are more important than other things. But if I was the lighthouse, if I got my business to the point where I'm running it as that solid structure, I've got a team in place, that light is scanning, I have a dashboard. I have numbers I believe in the business that are telling me, I mentioned time and team and money as perhaps the islands that are out there. Let's just stick with those, right? If we're late to deliver things to our customers, or we've got a quality issue, that's going to show up on my dashboard. That's the light that's flashing. And if everything else is green on my dashboard, everything else is okay, well, I can leave that for now. But there's this thing looming in the distance, and it's quality, or it's time to deliver, or it's, for a lot of us right now, it's recruiting. So it does change over time, but we have to choose what we're looking at.
And strategies, and maybe this is a good example as you're thinking about this, because essentially what you're saying, Dom, is, that proactive versus reactive, right? And
yes, exactly.
Yeah, and if we have a dashboard to whatever that means for your business, right? And the dashboard is really, here's some key components of our business, some key metrics that we're tracking to know that we're at least delivering on our sales pitch. We're at least delivering on our brand or our ideologies as a company. With that said, as you're thinking about this with each employee, I'll give a case in point. Sometimes, and maybe there's a couple examples for you to think on and how this relates to any business. I remember when I was an employee working for a company and we're working on this complicated hotel resort. And me being in the weeds, I was always like, I'm an employee. I didn't understand payroll, right? I don't understand what it costs to pay me and everyone on the project. I mean, it's just, I wasn't at that level. I'm just out of college, young know-it-all, But the reality is, I remember going to my director of operations and the owner, like, we need help, we need people. And they would always say, well, you can't just throw manpower at it. And there's other things that go into it. And it would frustrate me because I'm like, well, I need like immediate help now. And not to say anyone's right, wrong, or indifferent, but that was kind of how that was handled. And I see now, being an owner, there are different strategies on when you bring people on, when you train them, how you manage a process. And what does the tail look like? When you're done with this project, do you have to fire a bunch of people you just brought on? Are my systems not in place to like handle this? And so when employees are coming now saying, Brad, I think we need some help, there's a fine balance to say, okay, do we need to just hire someone to solve an immediate need? Or are we looking at the big picture? There's a lot of components. And I didn't even really ask you an exact question on that, just kind of formulating, what probably a lot of builders and designers are dealing with, that you need a lot of labor. There's not a lot out there. You're trying to keep this workload. And how do you balance that?
Well, that's just it. It's a constant balancing act. So for a lot of us, we feel like the captain, as you so accurately put it, reactive to the business. And we're good at it. We get really good at being reactive. But it's a choice. And it's a choice you've made, and it's a choice I've made. Actually, everybody listening has made the choice. The choice to stay the captain, or to try to work towards being the captain that wants to be the lighthouse, that wants to get systems and processes in place. We can learn on one project, let's say a complicated hotel build. Hey, we keep running short on manpower at this place. Oh, it's always on the facade. Why is it on the facade? And then you start to design buildings that don't have that requirement, or you start to anticipate in advance, and you something, the answer is different for everybody. But we can start to anticipate if we have the numbers. And if we're tracking things, and we go, hey, last time we did this on this kind of grade with that kind of soil, we ran into a problem. Let's anticipate that. Instead of just rushing blindly in, and like we did when we were laborers on a job site, I did it too. My biggest concern that day was I was excited what I had for lunch. This is going to be a great lunch.
What time's lunch?
What time's lunch, right? That was that's all I thought about. I was framing outside walls and thought I was doing a great job. I'm moving up in the company. But as you grow in a business, you start to anticipate the challenges, right?
Yeah, it's interesting you shared that. And I love the example you gave about just analyzing. And you gave the example of like a building schedule, which we can all appreciate. And for a designer who's maybe looking at that design process with the client, or the architect that's working with the client, then you have the consultants, and us as a builder, we have our building schedule. There's always a moment in that schedule where everything is like it's I've said it before on the podcast, emotional roller coaster. And this is where the clients get frustrated, because there's parts of the building where they're super excited. Cabinets are in there excited. You break ground or you demo the house or whatever, or demo like for a remodel, you're doing demo. And then it goes slow. And so they go through these kind of waves of emotions. But as a builder, we have the same thing. I can see where my team gets discouraged at certain points of the build, right? Depending on what build it is. And especially as you get into finishes, and to your point, Dominic, when you're talking about the facade, like some of these houses, you get into finishes and there is needed manpower. There is needed time to get the details right. So internally, I have to be able to have a dashboard to be cognizant of what's happening. I have to at least have some kind of labor chart to show me when all my jobs are hitting this stage, so that I can understand, the stress that's going to be put on my organization at that time. Yeah.
There's another report, and you may do this one already. I call it the end of job report. It could be called the autopsy.
Yeah, autopsy. I've heard
what
that.
Did we estimate, and what was the actual? And actually, looking back at our past jobs gives us a really good sense of the future. But the other thing that comes from that, if I want to move towards being a proactive business person, I'm always struggling to get more proactive in the business. But I think that's the point, is that you're always working towards being more proactive in the business. But when I do that and I start to anticipate these problems, I start to anticipate it's a communication issue at some point. So the boring part of it just takes forever to do a certain piece of the work. I should be telling my customer that up front. Let's just make this up, how a custom home renovation happens in Sacramento. Well, that should be a document I give to the customer. And during the sales process, I should say, this is where it's going to be exciting. This is where things are going to seem like they're taking forever. And then suddenly you'll leave one Tuesday night, you'll come back Wednesday morning, and the roof is on. Oh my gosh, it looks like it's done. Whatever that frustrating part is. But if we anticipate that, like the Lighthouse, we can start to move from being that reactive captain who's now taking angry phone calls from a customer who drove by with their friend and now they're embarrassed that the house isn't as far along as they thought it was. And you're the Lighthouse. You said, remember, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, Mr. and Mrs. Hernandez, We talked about this. This is the process we're at. Look at your flow chart. We're right here. By next week, you're actually going to see the roof. So tell your friend to come back. We'll be there.
Dom, I think this is why I love this podcast, is when I bring in guests such as yourself. And every time, my goal has always been that when listeners come on, they get, 2, 3, 4 nuggets, right? That they can take back, they can apply to their business. And,
right.
and ideally, be a better business owner, better entrepreneur, or just whatever. Maybe they're a leader and they want to communicate better with their team. And that's why I bring like a variation of people. What's interesting is, I've spoken about the emotional roller coaster, which is, really dedicated to the build. But case in point today, I was with a potential client, business development, and they want to hire us to build their residence. And, I'm walking through the timeline, which I tend to do. And I know the timeline. They don't know it. Like the first time building a house. Okay, what do I do first? Hire an architect, hire a builder. You go through these steps. How long? And then I tell them, hey, it's going to take 12 months to work permanent. They're like, wait, what? Like we can't start in like 3 months. And I'm like, well, here's why. Here's kind of the roadmap. But something I've never done, and what a waste of my time now that I'm speaking to you, Dom, so you've had to correct this for me, is that I've never created this roadmap, like you said, home renovation in Sacramento. But essentially for me, a building, not even a building schedule, but just a map. Like, here's what happens when you engage me and we have the team. Here's step 1. Here's step 2, step 3, up to permit. And it's going to roughly take this amount of time. And here's why. Here's the phases. And then the build, if it's a hillside, you're going to have 6 months of hillside. And then the slab. And I'm not giving them a finite schedule, but at least I can hand them a document and say, okay, look, you don't have to take all these notes. If you're hiring us, you're going to be in your house in 2 years or 2.5 or 3 years. And here's all the complexities that'll put you in these different categories.
Yeah. And the problem, that's fantastic. I'm glad you have that as a takeaway. But the problem is they watch TV shows. And in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, in 22, one of those half-hour shows is really 22 minutes. But like, oh, we're breaking ground. Oh, we're moving in. Oh, we just had a birthday party for my daughter. And you're like, that just happened in a TV show.
It is funny that you give the TV show example because, and again, without calling any, big TV shows out there, but the reality is when it comes to time and price, it seems to be irrelevant for them because somehow they build these things at no cost and they do it in 5 days, which is like, impossible, especially in this time and age. But the reality is what it comes down to, Dominic, is having a document such as this, it does a couple things. One, it makes a company such as RC more professional, right? More educated. It's going to save time in the sales process or the vetting experience, right? For both the client and myself, that interview. And it puts, it shows that we understand really from A to B that whole dynamic. Go. And if we understand that, it allows us to now refine and, as you mentioned, create that dashboard to now analyze it, autopsy it, and then like refine it more and more over the years to come.
Yeah. You mentioned about the sales process, and I'm always thinking about this, the marketing and sales, getting that right client in the right mindset to engage with us. You're now moving towards the Lighthouse. Problems are still going to come up. Let's agree on that. This is not magic, but at least we can point back to a central document that says, hey, here's where we are on the path. We're waiting for the city to get back to us. It's not us that hasn't shown up. The city hasn't given us the permit or whatever, right? But I also want to think, I like to think about the kitchen table. What am I doing in my business to influence my client's kitchen table conversation when they're having dinner? Because they're going to get a couple of quotes. They're going to talk to a couple of other builders like yours. Like you. I mean, you've got a great Instagram page. Nobody would ever choose anyone other than you. Right? But they might try. But they look at you and they get this very professional one-page outline of what it looks like when a high-end custom home is built in this city. The next guy comes along and writes it on the back of his business card. Or on a piece of graph paper. Yeah, I don't know. We build this thing for, somewhere between 800, 1.2. And they hand it to the people. So now back at their kitchen table, they're like, we're going to go with Brad. He knows what he's talking about. He has it on paper. He didn't write it on a graph. You're not writing things on a piece of graph paper, are you, Brad?
I'm not. No.
You weren't giving me any facial recognition there. I was like,
I'm taking mental notes, right? No.
Anyways, I'll leave you to guide the conversation. I'll stop.
No, I'm glad you need to. This is always what makes it more fun with the guests when they're super engaged and they're kind of putting me on the spot or so feel free to ask me questions. I love that aspect. But I guess to your point, what's interesting is it really what it comes down to is we're in a world, design, construction, architecture, where it's just And all of us would agree that in most cases, not the most organized, right? It just isn't. It's a chaotic industry. It's a tough industry. You're dealing with, in a lot of cases, unskilled labor, unrealistic timelines, unrealistic budgets, and then a lot of things that are outside of our control, dominated by the manufacturers and supply chain. And I mean, there's just so many aspects to this.
So many.
But to your point, Tom, is that the more that we can analyze and document and have systems for and write down, like you mentioned, I could create an easy template after this conversation to say, here's the channel of that sales process. And I can use that now in my process. I can use the emotional roller coaster. And these are just tools in my arsenal, to your point, that as you sit in front of that client, you can now start dictating the clientele you want, because you're going to be able to be more selective because you've built this brand.
That's right. And they know that you know.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's confidence. What I've seen is some of the most successful I've been around, people such as yourself, Dom, is that as I spend more time around successful business owners inside of and outside of construction, is they have a confidence, right? There's a preparation, there's a knowledge, there's a wisdom from being in business, from understanding, as you mentioned, every little part of the whole thing. If they understand it, they can communicate it well. And I want to bring this up to your TED Talk, and not to sidetrack, but what's interesting is offline before you came on, I said, hey, Dom, I saw you on TED Talk, which is really amazing, because I've always found, public speaking can be really difficult. A lot of people are like, I can't be on camera, when they're thinking about their social media presence, and you take it to a TED Talk, that's a whole new level, right? And where you're standing at a podium in front of people and your adrenaline's running, how do you prepare for that, right? How do you stand with so much conviction, to speak at an environment such as the one you did?
Yeah, it was hard. Like really hard. And I'm a relatively trained public speaker. I don't do it for a living, but I do it a lot as part of what I do. And I'm not sure if you've heard of a gentleman named Brian Tracy. He's a professional speaker. He's very big in the 80s and 90s. He's my old business partner. So I've been in that world of professional public speaking a lot. And you know how I got to deliver that flawlessly? Because I did a good job on that. There was surveys afterwards that said I was one of the 2 best speakers there. So that's kind of nice. But I failed a bunch. I presented at my church. I presented to the school attached to the church. I presented to a friend's engineering company. I presented to a friend of mine at his Christmas party. He does high elevation window washing, the guys that hang off the ropes.
Oh, yeah.
And I blew it, and I blew it, and I blew it. And every single time I walked out of there with my head hung in shame, and I went back and I studied again.
So let me ask you, when you say you blew it, and just to break that down, what does that mean, for us listening?
Thank you. So you wouldn't know in the audience that I blew it, because I salvaged it from what I knew. I cobbled it together, but it wasn't right. And so I left and I had to make up that part. When I presented to my kids' school, which is attached to the church, I only did half the presentation. I was 7 minutes. And they all looked at each other and went, oh, I guess we clap now. And I forgot half the speech. Forgot it. But then they were like, oh, that was wonderful. Thank you. Great insights. And they said, you could conclude it a little bit better. I'm like, I missed half the speech, but I didn't take it away from them because they didn't know. Right. And so then I get back in my car and I'm banging my head on the steering wheel like, you dummy, what did you do? And then back to the drawing board to practice again. But I needed to anticipate, there's cameras on you during the TED Talk. There's around 3,000 people in the audience. You only have one chance to nail it. And then the TED Talk people tell you, this is going live forever. So that's a lot of pressure. And I was telling a story about my daughter. So that's going to be pressure that follows her as well. So
it's interesting. And that was totally unrelated to what we're discussing here. You're speaking about family at that. But what's interesting is I think there's a couple points from when the reason I asked you about when you said you failed, or what does that mean to you, is that a lot of times in business, and one of my good mentors had taught me this, that so many times, and I've said this on the podcast, is that we focus on our failures, not our successes, right? So a lot of times we're our own worst enemy. We're very critical of ourselves. We focus on, and I have a couple peers. I mean, anyone can relate. Listen, you could have 20 clients and you could have 1 or 2 of them that are just really bad for whatever reason, whether it's self-inflicted or it's their personality or they're unrealistic, and they could sour the experience of everything, like for all the employees. And it's, and so many times we focus on this instead of saying, okay, I need to take a pause and focus here. And to your point, Dominic, that you're saying, okay, I internally know I missed this, but I'm going to fix it. Here's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to prepare myself even more for the next round.
Right. Reactive to proactive. reactive to proactive. We can cobble it together, all of us. If somebody's listening to your show, Brad, it's because they've already made it to level X. But I'll tell you, if they're listening to your show, it's because they want to get to whatever's next after X for them, right? So they already know how to cobble it together. They already know how to make it happen out of thin air. But those that want to get proactive in their businesses are listening to try and learn something to apply in their business. That's the difference.
See,
move towards the lighthouse.
And I love you get that example that move towards the lighthouse as you're thinking, mentally, okay, where am I at in my career? Am I the captain at the ship, screaming at the lighthouse? Or am I the lighthouse that's actually, I'm building systems, I'm here. But essentially it's a process. And it's so easy to look at Dom and say, man, Dom is he's a really bright guy. He's author, he's, built these businesses, but they don't realize that even something as simple, and this is what's amazing about some of these entrepreneurs, something as simple as public speaking. I shouldn't even say simple, but you do a TED Talk, and it's a 15-minute TED Talk. And people will go on and watch it, won't think much of it, and they don't realize for a year, Dominic's rehearsing that in his bedroom. He's speaking in public events, this same speech. He's practicing and fixing that over and over. And it's all that time spent behind the scenes that nobody sees.
It's actually funnier and more visual than that. So my daughter at the time was a competitive swimmer, and they swim early in the morning. So I would drop her off and go to the Starbucks. So I was the guy in the corner talking to himself at Starbucks for a year. See, you're just about to drink. I got you there. But I would just mutter to myself the speech again and again, because the one that I did was a very highly organized TED Talk. Some, there's different types, but I had to be word for word, and I had to hit time marks.
It's amazing. And then it just goes to show, to be good at business, a lot of us, business is just, and this is really important, is that what I've had to learn over the years is that, yes, I'm in construction, but I'm a business owner that happens to do construction. And really, I have to understand business and communication and systems and processes, and then integrate them as to the best of my ability into the construction world, which will then help, build our brand and just that company culture, which I do want to dive into with you. Company culture is such a big aspect of that.
Yeah. It's funny. It's hard to be a business owner.
Yeah. How have you been so successful? Maybe tell us that, Dom, because you've built and sold so many businesses. I mean, you have a book about, construction millionaire secrets, right? And you have a book there. I'm looking right there behind me. And then, it's how to build a multi-million-dollar company, doing business a smart way. Like how have you found success being a business owner?
I have found success by, here's the simplest thing. Michael Gerber wrote a book called The E-Myth Revisited. Have you ever read that book?
I haven't. It's The E-Myth Revisited?
The E-Myth Revisited. I
will read it.
Yeah, it's so good. I call it the most painful book I ever read. I was living in a small townhouse with my wife at the time. And I remember I was walking around our very small living room, one of those narrow, small living rooms. And I would read 2 pages, and then I would close the book, and I would beat my head against it, like, I'm doing this wrong. But The E-Myth Revisited is an excellent book. Michael Gerber. It's out. It's an old book. It's not even new. But the wisdom of it is in chapter 2 or 3. He talks about the tension that we have in our mind as a business owner, because we're being pulled in 3 directions. The one direction is the technician. In our trade, it's swinging the hammer. It's being on the tools, whatever that is.
Yeah, the labor,
right? Doing what we do. The second tension pulling on our mind is the manager, who's counting things and measuring things. And the other tension in our mind is the entrepreneur, looking towards the future and asking the big questions, how can I and what if? What I've worked really hard at understanding is how to balance between entrepreneur and manager and stay out of technician mode. Now, you have to do some technician work. You've got to go on site. You've got to talk to the customer. You have to make the sale, or you have to install the curtain wall. Whatever you have to do, you do. But that's not your job anymore. My job is to make sure the future of this business is strong so the people who work for me have gifts under the Christmas tree for their kids. That's my job. And so I constantly try to pull myself up there, and then obviously build strong people around me who can help me fulfill that dream or that vision.
Now, let me ask you this, and maybe this is just for some advice here, because most business owners can understand that importance, right? That the easy analogy, again, going back to, early in my career, I remember we were so busy, and this is, again, pre-recession. So it's 2007. Everyone could have any job. Is kind of similar to what we've seen the last couple of years,
Yeah.
Developments, investments, like over the top, everyone's remodeling. I mean, just crazy stuff. And I remember the owner of our company and our director of operations, they said, oh, we need another job, like we need a hole in our head, right? They didn't do business development. They just endless supply. Economy changes, bam, nothing there. Go from 300 employees down to 30. I mean, it's just catastrophic, right? Now, again, only some of this maybe they could have controlled because, it was a pretty tough recession for many people. However, many business owners now understand, at least you and I to some extent, that we understand by focusing on their business, we have to build a backlog and a pipeline, and we want to bring on good people. We want to train them and have, but we have to focus on the company and growth and future projects. However, that role's different. That role may entail playing a round of golf with the client. It may entail a dinner. It may a weekend getaway, whatever it may be, right? And, maybe a business lunch, or whereas sometimes employees in the weeds that are doing, as you mentioned, the technician part, they may feel there's something unjust, or why do they get to do this? Or, so how do you create that culture as a business owner where you still have a commitment from those on your team that understand the big picture, if you will, that everyone's role is different, that, when you're focused on the business, it's a different scope as to maybe being in the weeds with the technical part?
Yeah, I don't know that they ever understand it. I'll say that. I don't know they ever understand it. But I can tell you that building a great culture starts with hiring people who have the potential to be great on the team. So there's a concept called the victor-victim mentality. The really boring reference is the internal and external locus of control, and it's an old University of Melbourne study. But somebody wrote a book on it actually more recently. It's called the Oz Principle. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. Oz as OZ. There's two kinds of people in the world, and I want to hire the kind of people who are above the line, and I want to stay away from people who are below the line. And so I have to be the guard at the gate to make sure that if you're getting into my company, you're at least geared towards that positive side. So people who are above the line, we call them the winners of the world, the victors. Below that line, well, they're below the line. And so the opposite of winner is
the loser. The victor, the victim.
The victim, right? So we call them the whiner, because as a business coach, I have to be a little bit politically correct, just a little. But I'll tell you what, when I do the definition, the fact that you said loser is going to sting somebody listening to this show. It's going to sting them, because somebody who's above the line acts a certain way. They're positive and they're proactive, right? They take responsibility. They take ownership for the things they do. They have some sort of vision. So when I'm looking at their resume, and this is a person with no skill who's working at Wendy's, but also has their black belt in judo, that's who I want, because they've shown me they've done, they have some sort of vision. People who are below the line place blame. They make excuses. They're negative. They're in denial. And everything in the world is against them. And when that guy shows up to work, I have to ask him to change or ask him to leave. And listen, I'm a really nice guy until I'm not. You're just not going to make it on this team if you tell me, and I'm sure you've heard this too, Brad. Hey, Brad, sorry I'm late today, man. They've been working on the highway for 3 months. It makes me late every day. We hear the craziest things as owners, don't we?
Oh, yeah.
Blame. Right? One of my clients just showed me a text message that he got from an applicant. And the applicant says, sorry, I missed the interview today. My father has stage 4 cancer and my phone is broken. Can I come in tomorrow? Just think about that statement for a second. Your dad's, no, he just wrapped his dad up in his excuse for missing an interview. But he thinks tomorrow's going to be okay. His dad's still going to have cancer if that's the real reason. And how's he texting me anyways if his phone is broken? But people do that. Well, that person's below the line. And although it's hard to get labor now. If I hire that guy or allow him to stay on the team, shame on me.
Well, I love that you made that point that even though labor's tough, shame on me, because just like all of us know, we've heard there's nothing more expensive than a cheap bid, right? If you're going to hire a cheap contractor, it's going to be very expensive. If you hire a bad Apple employee, it's going to be very expensive. It's still costing training and, It could be a culture killer. And so you have to really analyze that. Are there, as you're counseling businesses and consulting them, how do you work through just the hiring process, thinking about this? When we know what that line is, whatever it may be for the company, how do you decipher and vet that? Because that's where it can be really challenging.
It is. So we need simple systems because not everybody's sitting behind a desk all day. You're talking about a guy running a framing crew or a roofing crew or a cabin. It doesn't, whatever. We're busy. And somebody shows up and says, hey, I'd like to work for you. You think, I need hands. But give them a little test. I accept that you need help today, digging post holes, digging whatever it is, but give them a little test. Listen, I'm going to hire you today, Brad, but I have homework for you tonight, and tomorrow I'm going to check on it. Can you watch this video? And I'm just going to pick a random one. Watch this video on ladder safety, and we're going to talk about it tomorrow. Watch this video on roof anchors and fall safety, and we're going to talk about it tomorrow. Brad, if you show up tomorrow, it's my responsibility to ask, did you watch that video I sent you on YouTube? It's not even my video. It's a YouTube video on ladder safety. And if you say no, I got to let you go. I asked you to do one thing. I just asked you to do that one thing. Now, obviously, I have to be clear about it. I have to explain why that's important. I have to explain that climbing a ladder is part of what we do. All of that's there. But if I've been really clear on my side and you didn't do the one thing I asked, which is watch a YouTube video, this isn't going to work. I need people who are proactive, who take ownership, who take responsibility, who do not place blame or make excuses.
Yeah, I love that aspect. When you talk about that, take ownership, they're proactive, they don't make excuses. I think most people listening can really understand someone's communication style or personality to some extent if they're that type of person. More importantly, I think you touched on a leadership aspect, Dom, is that you said, and you emphasized this, you said you have to make sure that, you give them this assignment, which many of us give assignments to our people, but you make them accountable. You actually follow up, right? You said the next day, did you do this? And how many times as managers or business owners do we make assignments and not follow up or just hope it gets done? We get busy, or more importantly, where our employees really care when you start thinking about like financial, like, hey, Dom, make some goals for this year. And if I'm not making you accountable for your goals, like how much do I care as a leader? And then does that even matter as we sit down at year, half year, mid-year reviews, right? Yeah,
I've done that. Like, I'm not a perfect business coach, I'll tell you that. I've gone through entire coaching meetings, and at the very end, somebody says, "Did you want to ask me about the homework you told me to do?" And I'm thinking, oh no. They did all this work. They did their work. They did their part, and I went off on another tangent, or something else came up. But I forgot to say, "Did you do your work?" And let's talk about it. They're very proud of it. And so, if I continue to do that, why would they do the work next time? I'm not going to check anyways.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's always funny when we lose our own track of mind at times. So when you're consulting businesses, why that? I mean, why change of career? Having built businesses yourself, and why get into like the consulting side? Is there similarities or?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that you asked the question that way. It's not a change of career. It is my career. I'm a business coach. I just happened to start businesses along the way.
I love that.
So back in 1999, I was a corporate guy. I worked for Sprint, and this was so long ago, Brad. I sold long distance. Now nobody sells long distance anymore. Yeah, it just comes. It comes with any Estee Lauder purchase at the mall. Like, nobody buys long distance anymore, right? But I used to sell corporate long distance. So companies that spent like 10, 20,000 a month in long distance. I was the guy who sold you on Sprint. So I learned a little bit there how to do some coaching, and I won't get into it too much, but I had a side business, and I was selling junk on eBay, and I sucked. It was not a good business. It was fun. I was selling used calculators and Dungeons and Dragons games and old ColecoVision and Atari systems. But it was really, have you ever seen one of these businesses? It's not doing well enough to close, and it's not doing well enough to keep open.
Yeah.
And so I got to be a better business person. And I was done with corporate. That's another story. We can do another podcast on that.
Oh, yeah.
So I thought, I was already a student of self-improvement and business improvement. And then I ran across this opportunity to become a business coach, to learn to teach it. And I thought, well, I just came from corporate, and I did that internally there. So I took that anyways. I became a business coach. And that's where I took that ColecoVision and used junk business and turned it into an online bookstore. And then I turned that into a mail order pharmacy. And when I sold it, we had 500,000 customers per year. And it was a mail order pharmacy. And I'm not a pharmacist.
Yeah. How do you get into pharmacy? I mean, this is such a far cry from Sprint to someone use the Ataris to construction to here you are doing pharmacy.
Yeah, but I'm neither of those things. I'm
And
also
that's an
not a
important
cabinet
point.
installer or a roofer. I'm a businessman who happens to run a company, right? And so we label ourselves by saying, well, I'm really good at cooking, so I have to be a chef. You need to, if you want to do that, you need to become a business owner who happens to run a restaurant. Or you'll always be working late, cleaning up, mopping after everybody's gone. You're always going to be stuck in that loop. And so that's what I recognized early on by becoming a business coach. And so I learned from my clients because I was coaching clients and I thought, well, I'm showing them how to do it. Why don't I do it? And so I made those changes internally, systems, processes, hire the right people, look for attitude, focus on what's good.
So I'd imagine over your career, you've worked a lot of businesses, seen a lot of people. How do you work through when you're a business coach consultant, when you find leaders or that maybe are victims themselves? They're not the victors. And because not every business owner is this idealistic victor, right?
Yeah, I struggle with this question because it's a pretty self-selected group. I've had a handful of people that were below the line, but usually by the time they get to having the conversation with me, they're weeded out. There's no fit. It's not going to happen. And I'm sure, Brad, you find the same thing. Somebody doesn't become one of your leaders or managers if they've got the wrong attitude. For some reason, they just kind of melt away because there's no fit. Right? Now they leave and that Brad guy's got unrealistic expectations. Whereas the guy that started the same day as him said, man, I love this. It's so nice when we see the homeowner move in and I'm so proud that I did the, molding and trim. It's just it's in their head.
Now, as a manager, as you're, listening to this, I would imagine there's also times where going back to difficult projects that maybe have a client that's really aggressive, screamer, unrealistic. How can that affect the temperature or culture on that employee itself that may be a victor, but now they're becoming the victim because of, lack of a better word, maybe the circumstance that they find that they're in?
Yeah. You mean, how do I deal with a client who's a little bit below the line?
Well, yeah, a client, or I look at this as an employee, and maybe because I have going through this, how do I support a couple team members that may be dealing with a difficult client that's really creating a lot of anxiety and stress and wear and tear on that individual, right?
Well, let's make that situation worse so that I can answer it, I think, a little bit better. Let's say somebody listening has a family member in the business. It might be a partner.
This is actually a good topic because a lot of people reach out like, how do I do this with family? But go ahead.
Well, and so family businesses are one of my specialties. That large business, that pharmacy, was with my cousin. So we're still cousins, but we're not business partners.
So walk through it. Well, explain that.
But let me use the analogy
Sure.
that we're using here in construction. So it's really our values are different, right? And I don't want to get all Lucky Charms on this thing, but we just have a different way of seeing the world. They think they're right, and I think I'm right. Let's start there. So I have to show by example that I'm only willing to accept above the line type of communication, above the line thoughts, and above the line processes. And then I have to, it's going to be a long process if you've got a family member or an employee, a valued employee who's below the line, and you have to work with them over time. It may never change, but you can mitigate it. If it's a family member, it just is. It just is. But we have to mitigate that as much as possible. And so by continuing to emphasize, we're not that kind of company. We're the company that takes responsibility. We're the kind of company that doesn't blame the customer. And it might feel like you're beating your head against the wall, but it will come to pass that at least they're going to become quiet when it gets to be an awkward conversation and let you take the lead. Unless we actively take the lead on what the culture of the business will be, that negative culture will take over.
How many successful partnerships have you seen in companies?
I've seen tons, actually. There's some, not to call out any community in particular, but the Amish are so kind to each other when they're brothers and cousins. They're so incredibly kind in extremely difficult situations. But usually, I can't say usually, I'm dealing with people who have some vision for the future, but they're lost. They know they're the captain and they want to be the lighthouse. And so they're open to change. And it takes a while sometimes, but we'll get them there as long as they're open to it.
For a business owner, and again, not asking you to consult everyone on the show today, if I'm a struggling business, or, are there certain metrics I should be looking at? Are there certain things that, we're when you're working, and you may have a pattern here as you're bringing on a client for the first time, what are those some first areas of investigation where you're looking into and say, you know what, I really think we should start here, to start making some changes?
Okay, well, you just took me into boring land, but can I just be boring?
I don't think any of this is boring, but that's me.
Because what we need is a business operations flowchart. I'm sorry, there might be a better name out there, but that's what I call it. It's just, how does business flow in and out of our company, right? So let's move from the general to the specific. And for those of you who are listening, not watching the video, I'm holding my hands out at the top of a triangle here, and it gets very narrow at the bottom. So inverted triangle. It doesn't matter what company this is, by the way. And this goes to your question, how can I run a pharmacy? And then how can I run the other companies? And then how can I be in construction? It's because I'm in the business of business. And this is how business always flows. At the very top, there's marketing. That's how people, marketing makes the phone ring, sales makes the cash register ding. So after marketing is sales. So what are your key marketing numbers you have to track? We can see a change in the market coming when we see our leads dropping off, or the quality of the leads dropping off, or the size of the jobs. That's the canary in the coal mine for us, right? So you start with marketing, then you move to sales. Well, there's some metrics we want to track in sales. And I'll give you a freebie here that is incredibly powerful for everybody. On sales, I want everybody to start tracking number of first appointments, which you said you met somebody today, Brad. Hopefully, if this was the first meeting, that's the number we want to track. That's the leading indicator. Not the fifth and sixth meeting. I don't care about the fifth and sixth meeting. I mean, I care. But as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, I only care about that first meeting. So my hands are back up here. So we got marketing. Then we've got sales. Well, now the sale happens, right? So there's some administration or paperwork that happens in between there that moves it to production. So you might have engineering. For those of you who run wood shops, there's going to be somebody sending the plans to the CNC, right? Whatever that manipulation of the sales contract to make it come to life is, right? Elevations, takeoffs, all that stuff. So that's there. So what do we track there? Number of jobs sent to the CNC, number of packages completed, number of permits applied for, whatever. Then we've got production. And, Brad, you and I are in construction, and construction has a million flavors, millions. So you can't say what one person calls construction, another calls demolition, another calls refurbishing, whatever that is. And then after that, we've got quality control, should be measured. Punch lists is language that we're very comfortable with, change orders. We want to track those things, right? Those are indicators that tell us what's happening in the company. And then beyond that, we can get into the financial numbers. How many deposits did we collect? How many final payments did we collect? What are our progress? All those things. It's just normal accounting stuff there, but the high level. I'm not an accountant. I don't want to be. There's people for that. Now I can log in from Hawaii, and I can see my whole company on a piece of paper or on one spreadsheet. And I can see where numbers are off or where trends are popping up that should cause me concern. And that's where I spend my time.
I love that. And so I was just making this triangle here as I'm looking at this, as you're talking about marketing, sales, admin, production, as we get down and, into the financial side. My question for you is, one of the points you made, like today when I make this first visit, what do you mean by tracking, that first indicator, that early indicator, that first meeting?
Right.
What does that mean? Are you saying that I need to calculate what's my closure percentage off of that, or how often does that turn into a job, or what metric am I really looking for?
Yeah. So let's say that it wasn't you, but I was your sales guy. And you said, Dom, how many sales meetings did you have this week? And I'll say 5. I had 1 every day. And you would look at your numbers and say, well, Dominic's doing a wonderful job. He had 5 meetings. But then you dig into it and you realize I've seen each of those clients 9 times.
Repeat. Yeah.
Well, that's not real data. The only thing that counts when we are in sales is number of first meetings. Now you can see the sales manager part of my background coming up and the hackles on my back. That's all I only care about. I mean, there's other things, but as the leading indicator, number of first meetings. That will tell me our true forecast, because then you can look at those first meetings and say, well, how much are they worth? How much do we think they are? What's their chance of closing? And you could say, well, in the next 6 months, 600 grand of business based on we did $1.2 million of first meetings, whatever your close rate is.
That makes complete sense. And that's where, given that analogy, because I'm looking at it where it's just me pretty much on business development, right? We're a boutique firm, it's different operations.
Sure.
But to your point, where especially if you're a subcontractor, a bigger firm, and you have salespeople or business development, that's how you can track is that how many first appointments, because when you've signed a client in your 6th, 7th meeting down the line, they're already in, they're in the funnel. So
you can't count that meeting anymore.
Yeah. It doesn't count. But what's interesting to that, too, is as you think about these metrics, I was speaking to another contractor. He's a general contractor such as myself, actually Jim with CRC Builders in Napa, California. And he said what he does for his salespeople, or his estimating people, he says, Dom, you need to be bidding X dollars a quarter, right? So he gauges it from his estimating department, like, say, you need to bid $6 million worth of work every quarter. So his responsibility is to have $6 million a quarter of active projects that he's bidding, right, and tracking. But essentially it's the same thing, whether you're tracking appointments or estimating jobs or whatever your business is specifically, but that is what you need to be tracking. That'll help gauge the future health and growth of the company.
Yeah. Can I add to that? I
Sure.
just wrote that note down, so thank you to CRC Builders. In the beginning, it doesn't matter what you track. And the reason I say that is because you're becoming a company who tracks things. And you'll figure out after a little while, hey, we're tracking the wrong thing. But you can change that once you're already a company that tracks things. If you're not a company who tracks things, you're never going to figure it out. So go get it wrong. This actually goes back, I guess, to your point. The TED Talk seemed like it went flawlessly, but I failed a bunch of times. I don't have the expectation that I'm going to get it right every time. I'm definitely in the camp, and some people don't like this. I'm definitely a fire, aim, fire kind of guy. But I don't care. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it to my best ability. And when I find out that doesn't work, I'm going to change and we're going to do it again. And I allow my people to have that same leeway.
Now, explain this, because I understand the fire, aim, fire. You're not risk averse, right? And so explain what that means for those listening. What does it mean, fire, aim, fire?
So, yeah, thank you. So my perspective is I'm not trying to be perfect. Perfection will kill creativity.
And you're willing to jump off that ledge. Like, I'm going to take the chance. I'm going to take a shot. I may have to recalibrate or aim or figure it out on the next round, but the next time I'm going to be even better and more accurate because I'm going to document this.
That's right. But I can be an overthinker, and I've been an overthinker before. We're like, what if we track this number? And then we track this number. And before you know it, filling out the form is another job. It's somebody's career. No, I've gone down the wrong path, right? Just get the right numbers, get a couple of good numbers, get it close to right. And then who's going to probably come back and tell me if I've made the right hires. One of them is going to put their hand up in a meeting and go, Dom, I think we're tracking the wrong number. You're tracking number of appointments, but shouldn't we be tracking number of first appointments? And then I think, wow, she's really smart. Because here I am following my system, that if I listen to my people, she's taking ownership, she's got a suggestion, and she's right. We should be tracking number of first appointments.
And I love that when you've as a business owner, to your point, Dom, as you've hired those victors, as you've hired the right people on board, and they give great counsel because they're in this and they're giving some great pointers, and you take that to heart, builds culture, but also refines systems, and it gives you another aspect to the company. What's interesting is through your, the upside down triangle you mentioned here is that one of the last aspects, and I want to be sensitive to your time here, but you mentioned the financial part, and I know something you're big on is find and fix profit leaks, right?
Yeah.
Essentially, what is that? When you're saying find and fix profit leaks, how does that factor into the entire process we're doing the autopsy as well as, the end financial goal here?
So thanks for asking it. There's 8 different places in a construction business that there's profit leaks. And going into each one of them individually isn't as much value as saying, there's places in the company where we've got problems, whether we think they exist or not. As an example, one of them is estimating. Mistakes that we make in estimating become indigestion through the whole company, right? Or it becomes a burp or something worse that we all have to deal with, right?
A lot of times worse, especially lately.
So, but I like visuals. I guess you can tell, Brad. But remember that general to the specific. Imagine that's a path that we're building, and there's a bunch of paving stones there. So estimating is one of those paving stones. I want to pick it up and I want to look under there and go, you know what? Estimate. We have one thing that we need to solve in estimating. Let's go solve that. So we solve it. And then we put the stone back down and we move to the next problem. There's always going to be a next problem. There's a gentleman named Paul Akers, and he wrote a book called 2 Second Lean. Just really great. He's a cabinet maker who specializes in lean manufacturing. Now, some people hear lean manufacturing and they put up their hands. Oh, we don't want to talk about lean manufacturing. Well, I'm still going to talk about it. He says something really great. He goes, after you fix a bottleneck, there's going to be another one. Go find it and fix that one too. And so it's an attitude thing. Remember the captain versus the lighthouse? That light is spinning. And when I'm looking for the problems and I go find that problem and I attack the problem runs away. We become kind of company that finds problems and fixes them. And those are the profit leagues.
And that's why it's really important as you think about that, as you think about your business, the importance of the cost analysis, the job costing, understanding where are we spending money, how much are we spending on marketing or travel, how much are we spending on estimating, right? And understanding these numbers, you can evaluate them, and then, as you said, find the leaks and then fix those bottlenecks.
How much are we spending on estimating, right? That's a good one, because if right now, when we are going to be very picky, if we think there's going to be a change in the market, we're going to want to estimate everything, but there's a cost. I'm giving free work when I'm providing bids. So now, to be proactive, I have to go back and qualify my leads even better to make sure that by the time we invest in estimating, we're only estimating the best leads with the highest chance of closing. And then you hold that piece of paper up in front of them and said, this is how custom home renos happen. Over $10 million in Sacramento. And I just made Sacramento up.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you have to hand me that piece of paper for me to go, this person really understands my problems. And yes, I do live in a home over $10 million in Sacramento. Right? Suddenly they're elevated and they're like, this is our guy. So you've now taken a qualified lead and you've ramped them up.
It's amazing. I mean, I could speak to you forever, Dom. What do you do for fun outside of business? I mean, I know how engaged you are in business in your career, and what keeps you busy outside of that?
So I love going to the gym. I go to the gym in the mornings. Anybody who follows my Instagram is very frustrated at my gym picture postings because it's not me posing. I have a picture of my sweat angels that I post. But you know what? I'm a really bad fly fisherman. I love fishing. I actually took some clients fishing in Venice, Louisiana 2 weeks ago. And if you haven't gone, Brad, you've got to go.
Oh, I need to. I've never been, yeah.
So good. So I love fishing and hunting. I love hunting. I love hunting with my dad. He's 83, and I cherish every single second of it.
And you still go?
Yeah, we do a lot of driving now.
Yeah. So what do you hunt? Is there any specific game you're hunting after?
I leave Friday for moose.
Wow. Where at?
Well, if you know the path to the Alaska Gold Rush, you take that road, and then you take a left. And then you drive in for 3 hours. So that's where we're going.
That's amazing.
In the Pacific Northwest.
Good for you. That's so exciting. A couple of my employees are, from the Midwest, big hunters. They're heading back, because it's hunting season in November.
It's the
back
season
home.
Right now.
Yeah. Good for you. Here's a big thing, to get drawn for elk, in Phoenix. There are actually some really big elk in North Phoenix, and
so
good area.
For anybody who watches the TV show Alone, I don't know if you've ever seen that, where they drop people in remote locations.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so there was an Alone location on Vancouver Island, which was 2 hours from where I took my friend to get a 7x7 elk. Yeah.
It's amazing.
And I would be lying if I didn't tell you what I do for fun is I'm a dad. I love being a dad. Being a dad is why I sold my last company. And my son was not going well for my son, but he plays lacrosse, field lacrosse. I'm pretty sure he thinks he's going to be a famous field lacrosse player. I don't have the heart to tell him. Thank God the PLL came along. But yeah, I'm a dad and a husband. That's really what I am.
That's amazing. So what do you have that's upcoming and exciting?
Well, I've got the fishing trip or the hunting trip with my dad. I'm going for bonefish in Molokai in February. I've launched a new brand called 10X BLT, 10X Built. And you can see that I like to have fun with what I do. For people that want to tow a bigger boat to a nicer lake with a newer truck, BLT. But also business, life, and time. I am the luckiest guy in the entire world because I'm supposed to be a business coach. It's what I'm supposed to do. It's what I'm good at. It's what I love. And so I get to do it.
Well, that passion shows. I mean, especially when you're passionate about what you're doing, you just have that much more engagement and authenticity. So, it comes across well received, Dom. So,
thank you
and for all those listening, where can they find you?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, although LinkedIn, I found maybe don't do that because there's so many spammers on LinkedIn now. But you know what? You can find me at Profit Tool Belt, which is one of my websites, profittoolbelt.com, or 10xblt.com. So I'm pretty easy to find. If you can't find me, you ain't looking.
You're amazing, Dom. Well, I can't thank you enough for making time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Brad. And hey, listen, folks, Brad was on my show, so you can hear him. You were fantastic on my show too.
Likewise, my friend.
Thanks.